To call Kit Klarenberg an investigative journalist would be a considerable understatement, as I often say, a bit like saying Cristiano Ronaldo is a footballer. Cristiano Ronaldo is the greatest footballer, and Kit Klarenberg is not just the greatest investigative journalist on this side of the Atlantic Ocean these days. He's just about the only one. Certainly him and his fellows at the Grayzone. Max Blumenthal was on last week, I think, or the week before, and many other Grayzone investigative journalists have appeared on the show over recent months and years. But the reason why Kit Klarenberg is particularly important and red hot right now in Britain is because of his incredible, groundbreaking journalism over the unmasking of the former Trotskyite Paul Mason, a former BBC economics editor, a man who play acts even until this day as a leftist, turned out to be a rat, turned out to be a man who informed on his own friends, turned out to be a man secretly and through a variety of, as he would put it, cutouts, was intending to hunt down people with dissident views on the likes of the war in Syria or the war in Ukraine, or attitude to NATO, attitude to empire. He was seeking to establish a nexus of people who would witch hunt in a McCarthyite drive to have dismissed, have deplatformed, have demonetized, have be taken off the air people like me. I was in his graph. I was glad to say, I'd have been offended if I wasn't. A graph which purported to show how Russia and China were manipulating politics in Britain, and indeed in the United States, but in Britain in particular, right down to the streets of the north of Britain, of the Muslim community, of the black community, of trade unions like the RMT that I spoke about earlier, how really Russia and China were pulling the strings through people like me, of all of them. It doesn't get much lower. To be unmasked in such a way, you would have thought, would have left the now naked Paul Mason with nowhere to go but the library with a pearl-handled revolver and a bottle of whiskey. But not so. Mason is unembarrassable. He is impossible to shame. Let's see if we can find out more from the one and only Kit Klarenberg. Kit, thanks very much for joining us. Before I turn to Paul Mason, you wouldn't expect me not to, I just wondered if you'd seen the interview with the excellent chaps at Declassified that Mason couldn't quite work out whether they were Russian puppets or not. Jeremy Corbyn gave an interview with them in the week in which he made some quite startling, not surprising, but quite startling and shocking revelations about the role he thought that the security services had played in his downfall. If you saw it, tell us what you thought.
Well, I mean, yes, this was an absolutely extraordinary interview, although I will preface this by saying it's extremely disappointing Jeremy seemingly hasn't found his voice until now. This is well over 2 years after he stepped down as leader. This is almost 2 years since he was egregiously suspended from the Labour Party for the high crime of telling the truth about the non-existent anti-Semitism crisis, which he allegedly presided over. And bizarrely, he seems committed to returning to Parliament as a Labour MP, being reinstated by a party that not only wronged him and his supporters, but continues to do so brazenly. The party as it stands now is a bunch of, a ragtag bunch of Tories and New Labourites committed to purging Labour of any and all meaning and principle in pursuit of a centre-right middle ground, which they're never ever going to appease. I mean, all that said, Jeremy was unprecedentedly candid in a way no other former party leader I can think of in history has ever been before. I think he confirmed what many of us already knew, but added absolutely vital new detail to what did happen to this wide-ranging establishment plot at every level to sabotage him and his leadership and ensure that hope for millions of oppressed people within Britain, and indeed abroad, was just comprehensively crushed. This involved the military elements of the Labour Party, the Israel and Gulf lobbies very prominently, and the establishment media like The Guardian and the security intelligence services. They were all arrayed against him and everything he represented, and were willing to go to almost any length to ensure ruin his electoral chances. The intelligence services were briefing against him in private. They were setting up traps for him to fall into. So they invited him for a kind of routine briefing, MI5 and MI6, at their offices on the terror threat. And this was framed in the press as him having to be brought to heel because he was such a threat to national security. You had former, both on and off record, senior intelligence officials like Richard Dearlove saying that sort of casting aspersions as to whether Jeremy Corbyn was a Czech or Soviet spy. That yes, again, that he was a threat to national security. That Britain would not be safe if he was in Downing Street. Or this is heinous libels. And he remained silent at the time. I see that the Observer today said that Boris Johnson's continued tenure in Downing Street was a national disgrace on the basis of his dishonesty, immorality, and corruption. We knew very well who Boris Johnson was and what kind of government he would lead, years in advance of him getting there. So I mean, it's a shame that it's a shame that they didn't see it as an incumbent to warn people more, and that they saw Jeremy as the greater evil. And I still I also find it completely incredible, as Jeremy said in this interview, that he didn't do proper due diligence into that snake in snake's clothing, Keir Starmer, and identified what who he was and what he actually represented, which is the British establishment, the security services, and total prostration to the wills of the US empire, as exemplified by his energetic efforts to lobby Swedish authorities to keep the completely bogus sexual assault charges against Julian Assange open. For the purposes of blackening his reputation and, offering up more reason for him to get extradited to the US.
It is, I agree with everything you said there. It is important and this interview did that for me, to confront again the sequence of events which we all lived through and we felt the blows and so on, but a bit of perspective, and then you look back on a situation where in a so-called democracy, the leader of Her Majesty's opposition, the Right Honourable Jeremy Corbyn, Privy Councillor, was told by the American Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and the man who was plotting to kidnap Julian Assange on the streets of London, and if necessary to kill him there, by Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel. Both of these foreign statesmen made it clear that they would move any mountain, do anything, stoop to anything to stop the British people electing Jeremy Corbyn as their Prime Minister. And then, as I myself had forgotten, a serving military officer on television saying that the armed forces would take action to stop Jeremy Corbyn should he look like he was going to become the elected Prime Minister of Britain. I agree with you, it's inexplicable, inexcusable that Corbyn has been so quiet for so long about all of this, but at least it's now back on the agenda, and that has its chilling effect, doesn't it, Kit? Just like the Assange effect. If you think that you're going to upset the apple cart in British politics, that you will be subject to what is essentially a coup, and may not even escape with your life, you're much less likely to take a chance on doing that, aren't you?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and I think that actually, I mean, for the longest time, for 2.5 years now, I have cited the experience of Jeremy Corbyn as Labour leader as a very clear example of the fact that Britain isn't a democracy. Decisions are not made by the people; they are made by vested interests, by powerful seen and unseen lobbies, of which the British public is virtually or is completely uninformed and is never reported in the mainstream media. I mean, I think that with Mick Lynch now so effectively forcing working class interests back on the national agenda, I mean, the Declassified interview is a very timely publication. I would implore him and indeed all your viewers to read that, read it in full to know precisely what they're up against. Starmer, despite his ever dwindling popularity and ever increasingly blatant irrelevance, is still committed to erasing all traces of Corbynism from Labour and its membership and its parliamentary representation. He will not stop until there is no revolutionary fervour left anywhere in the mainstream. He cannot be allowed to succeed. But yes, I mean, I think that what Lynch is demonstrating is that we might not always live in a democracy, but we can do. People need to collaborate. They need to unite. They need to mobilise, and not stop until they get what they want. That was one of the major failings of Corbynism, was that John McDonnell was constantly in his ear saying, you need to compromise, you can't annoy too many people. And then we end up with a disaster that was the second referendum, which is what really killed off Labour. Like that's kind of middle ground way of doing things is always going to fail, because you have an enemy, or indeed enemies, who never bend, who never compromise, and will find anything they can to attack you. It's the same with the manufactured anti-Semitism crisis. Chris Williamson, the now former MP for Derby North, made the completely reasonable observation that the anti-Semitism, the charges of widespread anti-Semitism in Labour were fraudulent, and in fact, actually, Labour had a consistent track record of standing up against anti-Semitism. He was told to apologise by party chiefs and by the membership, and in the hope that this would make everything go away. And the second he did, he's admitted to being an anti-Semite, so therefore he needs to be suspended. And this is what they do. So yes, do not compromise, do not stop marching until you get what you want.
I must sit down with you sometime. I became very friendly with Harold Wilson after he left office. And he told me in some detail in his rather gloomy mansion flat behind Westminster Cathedral about how they bugged and burgled him throughout his time as Prime Minister. It's a good story. Now, Kit, I'm so old, I remember Paul Mason when he was a raving Trotskyite who thought I was a backsliding reformist, the worst insult you could give on the left back in those days. Now we know that Paul Mason is something different, and we have you to thank for that. Give us a quick summary, please, of what it is that you discovered about Paul Mason.
Okay, well, I mean, it's an incredible transformation, isn't it? I mean, I think in your own words, George, it's it's a butterfly back into a slug. I mean, this is a former Trotskyite, pro Corbyn, pro Syriza, anti-war tub thumper, who it now appears, at least in his latter years, is a British intelligence asset and fifth columnist on a secret mission to destroy the anti-war, anti-imperialist left. It's not clear when he turned, or there's the obvious question is if he turned at all, and he wasn't in fact always a kind of sleeper agent and wrecker behind the scenes, hiding in plain sight. But he now, at least now, possesses a good quote-unquote friend in British intelligence with whom he is coordinating, and it seems this individual is directing his activities in smearing anti-war, anti-imperial activists, academics, journalists, media outlets like Declassified UK as somehow witting or unwitting tools of Kremlin and Beijing's malign influence in Britain. It's very, very extraordinary transformation. You know, he has publicly smeared critics of the established Western narratives of the Ukraine conflict as Putin puppets. He sought to have independent media outlets like the Grayzone and independent journalists such as myself deplatformed and financially ruined through malicious underhand tactics. Yeah, and as our subsequent investigations will show, it appears his attempts to enter Parliament as a Labour MP are being directed, or at least, yes, coordinated with British intelligence. And this, you know, if he is elected, I see that he's now running in my my birthplace of Camberwell and Peckham, you know, from my cold dead hands. You know, if essentially. He's been given lists of talking points and direction in terms of, you know, how to campaign by a British intelligence officer. You know, he claims that the suggestion that he has any relationship with British intelligence is false and defamatory, but, you know, it's all there in black and white in leaked emails that we have acquired, and we're going to keep reporting on them. We will not stop, because, you know, this is of such public interest. His attitude and his approach to dealing with this, you know, very obvious scandal has been to claim that well, it's all false, I'm not going to comment on it, and just carry on going as normal. You know, people aren't buying this, but he's, yes, committed to this strategy.
Extraordinary. Camberwell and Peckham, he'd have to get through me and you first if that were to turn out, but I suspect that the members there will have the same kind of taste that the members who turned him down didn't even put him on the shortlist, because nobody likes a grass, nobody likes a rat, do they?
No, I mean, you know, and I think that, again, his communications with this British intelligence officer, he goes by the name of Andy Price. I think that it just really sums up, you know, what Jeremy Corbyn said during the 2019 general election campaign. You know, it's not me that they're afraid of, it's you. You know, this is all about ensuring that Labour remains a form of limiting revolutionary fervour, you know, as a barrier to change. And yeah, I mean, it's incredible to me that Mason would sign up to this. It's not entirely clear from the emails the extent to which he is fully conscious, or that may be, you know, a failure of quote unquote intelligence, or, you know, on his part. You know, but, you know, he's feeding, you know, information on conferences that he attended. He's boasting of how his efforts have, quote unquote, cauterized Stop the War and Jeremy Corbyn in Britain, and how, you know, no one wants to be associated with him publicly. I mean, I think that actually, you know, with these enormous protests across the country now, mass industrial action, at which, you know, Jeremy Corbyn is at the forefront, he's finding out how wrong he was, and actually how little influence he has. And again, I just think, you know, there's that cliche, which is, oh well, you know, this person wasn't sorry when they were getting away with it. You know, Mason was doing this for months, you know, in secret, and then yes, now his approach is to just try and cauterize it and say, oh well, this is nothing, I'm going to carry on and I'm not going to comment on it. He can't be allowed to get away with this. It's really, really, really shocking. I mean, we already have a Labour Party that is led by an individual, yes, the aforementioned snake Keir Starmer, who is, you know, up to his elbows in the security intelligence services, quite clearly played some role in shutting down official investigations and criminal prosecutions of intelligence officers who were intimately embroiled in torture and extraordinary rendition. And so, I mean, there's the open question, isn't it? Like, how many more effective assets and agents are being run within the Labour Party directly by British intelligence? This is, you know, our reporting on Paul Mason represents, you know, yes, just one tranche of leaked emails. Quite how many others are on the payroll or are being managed and directed is an open question.
Kit Klarenberg will be following your work, of course, with intense interest on the Grayzone, and follow Kit on Twitter. Also, he is a font of powerful and important information. Thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows.